Sophia. The name a ghost from a sunnier, vibrant past ripped from his throat, raw disbelieving. There, huddled on the biting New York pavement, the girl who had owned his first love. His youthful heart was a broken mirror of memory. A tattered coat, her only shield against the unforgiving wind, a tiny, fragile baby clutched desperately, almost invisibly to her chest. Her eyes, those unforgettable sapphires that once danced with laughter, now hollowed by an unspeakable fear, flickered with terrified recognition. "Ethan," she choked out, shrinking back against the cold stone, her voice a ragged whisper. "No. Please, you can't be here. Go. You have to go now." Her desperate plea cut through the biting wind, hinting at a terror far greater than the cold. What will Ethan do when faced with such a shocking past and a perilous present? Follow their story to uncover the truth and share your theories below. What secrets could make his mere presence so dangerous? The biting November wind whipped Ethan's tailored cashmere coat tighter around him. As he strode down Fifth Avenue, the city's symphony of car horns and distant sirens, a familiar, almost comforting soundtrack to his thoughts. Another deal closed, another string of zeros added to an already staggering net worth. His life from the outside was the gleaming epitome of success, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a name that commanded respect in global finance, a future mapped out with predictable precision. Yet in the quiet moments like this, walk from his office to a solitary dinner, he'd likely pick at a certain hollowness, echoed a subtle counterpoint to the resounding applause of his achievements. His meticulously planned Tuesday evening, a quiet dinner, reviewing the Asian market reports, was about to be spectacularly and rather grimly derailed. As he neared the corner of 57th, a scene unfolded that seemed to tear through the very fabric of his well-ordered reality. A woman huddled against the unforgiving stone of a luxury department store, a tattered coat pulled around a painfully thin frame. Her long, tangled hair, the color of dark honey, fell across her face, obscuring her features. But it was the small, whimpering bundle clutched Bohohogoro in her arms that first snagged his attention, a tiny life wrapped in a dirty, threadbare blanket. Beside her, a crude cardboard sign, its message simple and heartbreaking, "Please help. Anything." Ethan, a man who prided himself on his composure, on his ability to remain impassive in the face-offs of high-stakes negotiations, felt the breath catch in his throat. He'd seen poverty before, of course, the city had its shadows. But something about this woman, a flicker of a gesture, as she tried to shield the baby from a gust of wind, an almost imperceptible tilt of her head. It sent an icy spear of premonition through him. He took a hesitant step closer, then another, an unseen force drawing him in. He told himself it was just compassion, a fleeting urge to offer some assistance more substantial than the spare change most would toss. But deep down, a disquieting familiarity stirred a ghost of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Excuse me," he began, his voice, usually so resonant and assured-sounding, strangely hesitant even to his own ears. The woman flinched, a hunted look in her eyes, as she slowly, reluctantly raised her head. And then the world stopped. The city noise faded to a dull roar. The wind ceased to matter. His heart, a steady, reliable organ, seemed to slam against his ribs. Time rewound, years melting away like snow in an instant. The grime, the desperation, the raw fear etched on her face couldn't entirely mask the delicate curve of her cheekbone. The wide-set eyes, that though now dull with hardship and haunted by an unspeakable weariness, were a startling, unforgettable shade of sapphire. Eyes that had once sparkled with laughter, with dreams, with a love that had defined his youth. "Sophia, The name was a breath, a whisper of disbelief torn from his soul. It couldn't be. The Sophia he knew. His Sophia was a vibrant, joyful girl from his sun-drenched California childhood, a girl who had promised to wait for him, a girl whose memory he had carefully locked away, a bittersweet treasure, too precious, too painful to revisit. Her reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Recognition flared in those sapphire depths, followed by a wave of raw, unadulterated shock that mirrored his own. Then just as quickly, it was doused by a crushing tide of shame, of mortification, so profound it made him ache to look at her. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Instead, she did the one thing that shattered the remaining vestiges of his composure. She lowered her gaze, pulling the baby impossibly closer, and tried to turn away, to shrink into the cold stone, to disappear. As if her current reality was a stain she couldn't bear for him to witness. A maelstrom of emotions, disbelief, anger at an unseen fate, a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow, threatened to overwhelm him. He, Ethan Maxwell, who could command a hostile takeover with a single phone call, found himself utterly inept, his mind reeling. "Sophia, it is you," he stammered, taking another step, crouching down, slightly oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by, the baby in her arms disturbed by the movement, or sensing her mother's distress, let out a thin, reedy cry. "Please." She finally choked out her voice, raspy, barely audible above the street noise, her eyes still fixed on the grimy pavement. "Go away, Ethan. Please just leave me alone. Leave her alone." The words were a physical blow. Leave her like this. The girl who had been his first. Everything. The thought was an outrage, an impossibility. "No," he said, his voice firmer now, a protective instinct he hadn't realized he possessed surging to the fore. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what happened." How did you end up here?" A bitter, hollow sound, a caricature of a laugh, escaped her lips. "Life happened, Ethan." Or maybe she added her voice, laced with a despair that chilled him to the bone. Life unhappened. She hugged the baby tighter, her knuckles white. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Not safe?" He frowned, a new alarm bell ringing. "What do you mean, not safe? Who are you afraid of?" Sophia shook her head, a tear finally escaping and tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "It doesn't matter. Just, please, if anyone sees you with me, it'll be worse. Worse than this." His mind raced. This wasn't just a story of misfortune, of falling on hard times. There was a distinct undercurrent of fear, a palpable sense of danger that emanated from her. The protective shell around his heart, carefully constructed over years of ambition and occasional cynicism, cracked wide open. He looked at Sophia, truly looked at her, at the haunted eyes, the trembling hands, the fierce, desperate love with which she clung to her child, and a resolution, cold and hard as steel, formed within him. He didn't know what shadows she was running from, what darkness had brought her to this desolate edge. But he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he couldn't walk away. "Get up, Sophia," he said, his voice gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. He extended a hand. "You and Lily are coming with me. Right now." He'd named the baby in his mind, a soft, hopeful sound for such a fragile being. Her eyes met his, then filled with a desperate conflict of fear, and the faintest, most hesitant flicker of something he hadn't seen in them since she'd first looked up, a fragile, almost extinguished ember of trust. The past had found them, it seemed, in the most brutal of ways. And what he did next, Ethan knew, would change everything. The discreet luxury of the Upper West Side apartment Ethan maintained for occasional, intensely private meetings or simply as a refuge from his own high-gloss life had never felt more like a sanctuary. He'd ushered Sophia and the baby, Lily he kept calling her in his mind, clinging to that small, hopeful sound, into the warm, softly lit space, bypassing his own sprawling penthouse, that he'd instinctively known would be too much, too soon. This apartment, with its understated elegance, and more importantly, its anonymity, felt like a gentle cocoon, while Sophia, pale and trembling, sank onto the edge of a plush velvet sofa, clutching Lily as if she were the last lifeboat on a stormy sea. Ethan moved with a quiet efficiency that belied the turmoil inside him. He adjusted the thermostat, his mind a blur of logistics he hadn't confronted in decades. Diapers, formula, warm clothes for a baby, softer clothes for a woman who looked like she hadn't known comfort in an age. He made a series of clipped, precise calls to a trusted personal assistant, a woman renowned for her discretion and almost telepathic ability to procure anything, anytime, anywhere. No questions, Maria, he'd said, his voice low. Just make it happen. And quickly. His assistant, bless her unflappable professionalism, had simply replied, "Consider it done, Mr. Maxwell." He could almost picture her raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but she wouldn't pry. That wasn't her style. He remembered thinking with a grim internal humor that while he could orchestrate multi-billion-dollar mergers, the sudden urgent need for a specific brand of infant formula felt like a far more complex negotiation. An hour later, supplies had arrived, delivered with the subtlety of a whisper. Sophia, initially almost catatonic with shock and exhaustion, watched with wide, wary eyes as Ethan, having dismissed the discreet delivery person, began to unpack the items. He fumbled slightly with a package of baby wipes, a moment of such uncharacteristic clumsiness that a tiny ghost of a smile touched Sophia's lips, before vanishing as quickly as it came. The tab is on the other side, she murmured, her voice still raspy, but a fraction stronger. He looked up, met her gaze, and for a fleeting second, the years dissolved. He saw not the destitute woman on the street, but the girl who'd once laughingly corrected his clumsy attempts to tie a fishing lure. "Right," he said, a slight warmth creeping into his own voice. "Always was better at the practical stuff than I was." It wasn't much, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of ice that her trauma had erected. Later, after Lily had been fed, a bottle Ethan had rather awkwardly prepared, and was now sleeping soundly in a hastily assembled travel cot swaddled in a new soft blanket. A fragile quiet settled between them. Ethan had made tea, a soothing chamomile, and sat not too close but not too far, on an armchair opposite the sofa, where Sophia now rested, a thick cashmere throw he'd found in a closet draped over her. He didn't press. He simply waited, letting the silence stretch, offering a space for her to fill when or if she was ready. The city lights twinkled through the large window, a distant, indifferent glitter. Finally, her voice, barely more than a sigh, she began. His name was Michael. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. He wasn't always like he became. At first he was charming. So charming. She stared into the depths of her teacup, her reflection shimmering. He made me believe in fairy tales again, Ethan. After you left, I thought I'd never. She trailed off a flush, creeping up her neck. Ethan's heart clenched. He remembered their parting, the painful youthful certainty that their paths, dictated by his ambition and her family's move, would somehow converge again. A promise broken by time and distance, and now it seemed by something far darker. He had dreams, Sophia continued, her voice gaining a little momentum as if a dam had been breached. Big dreams. A business he wanted to start. I believed in him. I poured everything I had into it. My small savings, my hope. A bitter laugh. Turns out his dreams were built on quicksand and bad company. She spoke of mounting debts, of hushed, anxious phone calls Michael would take in the dead of night, of a subtle shift in his demeanor, the charm curdling into a desperate, hunted aggression. He started borrowing from people you don't borrow from, Ethan. People who don't care about excuses, only about what you owe them. And their interest rates. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. They weren't just financial. Ethan listened, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This was more than just a failed business. More than just debt. The dangerous people she'd hinted at on the street began to take on a more menacing, albeit still shadowy form in his mind. He pictured Sophia, the vibrant, optimistic girl he'd known, slowly being dragged into this vortex of fear and despair, her light dimming with each passing day, each new threat. I didn't understand the extent of it, she whispered, shame lacing her tone. Not at first. I was naive. I kept thinking he'll fix it. We'll fix it. Her gaze lifted to his, filled with a raw self-reproach. How could I have been so blind? He'd come home sometimes, bruised, sometimes just empty. And he'd tell me everything was fine, just a little more time. He saw the internal struggle within her, the desperate need to make sense of the unspeakable. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. Instead, he asked, his voice gentle and Michael. Where is he now, Sophia? Her breath hitched. She looked towards the sleeping form of Lily, her expression a maelstrom of grief and a fierce, almost feral protectiveness. He's gone, she said the words, flat, devoid of inflection. About 6 months ago. They said it was an accident, a car crash. But her eyes, when they met Ethan's again, told a different story. They screamed of lies, of a terror that hadn't ended with her husband's death. If anything, it had mutated, and after he died, Ethan prodded, keeping his voice, even though a cold anger was beginning to simmer beneath his composure. The people he owed. They didn't just walk away. Sophia shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. They came for me, she choked out. They said his debt was now my debt. They said I knew too much. She paused, her gaze darting towards the window, as if expecting a phantom to materialize. They took everything, Ethan. Our small apartment, every last cent. They told me I had a week to come up with an impossible sum. And then they started making threats. About Lily. At the mention of her daughter's name in that context, a flicker of the old Sophia, the spirited girl, ignited in her eyes. A spark of defiance, of maternal fury. I ran, she said, her voice suddenly stronger, edged with steel. I took Lily and I just ran. We've been moving, hiding, until tonight, until I had nowhere left to go. Ethan's jaw was tight, his fists clenched. The narrative was incomplete, he knew. The full identity of these predators, the true extent of what they wanted from her, remained shrouded. But enough had been said. Enough to paint a horrifying picture. He thought of the girl who had chased butterflies with him in sunlit fields, now hunted on the cold streets of New York. The contrast was a physical pain. He rose, walked over to the window, and stared out at the indifferent city. His city. A city where he wielded immense power. Yet this darkness had festered, had touched someone he had once cherished. The what-ifs were a bitter taste in his mouth. What if he'd stayed in touch? What if he'd known he turned back to her? Sophia was watching him, her expression unreadable now, a fragile shield back in place. But he'd seen the cracks. He'd heard the broken pieces of her story, and the foundation of a new, unshakable resolve was settling within him. He would not let those shadows consume her or Lily. "You're safe here, Sophia," he said, his voice resonating with a conviction that seemed to fill the room. "For now. But we need to understand exactly who you're running from." And then he added a glint of cold steel in his own eyes. "We'll make sure they can never touch you again." She searched his face, a silent, desperate question in her eyes. Could she dare to hope? Could she dare to trust this man from a lifetime ago, a man who now inhabited a world so alien to her own? He saw the doubt, the fear still warring with a nascent hope. "I promise, Sophia," he said softly, and in the depths of his heart, he knew it was a promise he would move heaven and earth to keep. The night was far from over the past, far from buried, but for the first time in a long time, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the atmosphere. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the barest, most fragile whisper of a chance. A fragile semblance of peace had settled into the apartment over the next 48 hours. Ethan had ensured a steady, unobtrusive supply of necessities, and Maria, his ever-efficient assistant, had even managed to procure a few soft toys and a remarkably well-chosen selection of baby clothes for Lily. Sophia, though still shadowed by a bone-deep weariness and a persistent hunted look in her eyes, had begun to uncurl just a little. She ate small meals Ethan coaxed her to try, slept in exhausted, dream-haunted stretches, when Lily allowed, and even managed a fleeting, genuine smile when Lily grasped Ethan's offered finger with surprising strength. He'd found himself observing them, this mother and child who had crashed back into his life like a rogue wave with a complex mixture of remembered affection, profound pity, and a steadily hardening resolve. The illusion of sanctuary, however, was brutally shattered on the third evening. Ethan was in the small, well-equipped kitchen, attempting to prepare a simple pasta dish, a culinary endeavor far outside his usual Michelin-starred takeout routine, when a shrill alien sound pierced the quiet. It wasn't one of the apartment's phones. This was sharper, more insistent. He saw Sophia freeze in the living area, her teacup clattering against its saucer, her face instantly bloodless, her eyes wide with a terror that was visceral and immediate, darted to a battered backpack she'd kept clutched near her since her arrival. That can't be," she whispered, her voice a raw thread of panic. Ethan was by her side in an instant. "What is it, Sophia?" Her hand trembled as she fumbled with the backpack's zipper, finally pulling out an old, scarred burner phone, the kind designed for anonymity and quick disposal. It was ringing again, a tinny, menacing jingle. I thought I'd thrown it away," she stammered, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. They gave it to Michael, for them to reach him." "Don't answer it," Ethan commanded, his own voice, calm but edged with ice. The implications were chilling. If they still had this number, and it was active, but it was too late, whether by reflex or a desperate, ingrained fear of disobeying Sophia's thumb had already swiped across the screen. She held it to her ear, her knuckles white. Ethan could only see one side of her face, but the way her eyes dilated, the way her breath hitched and died in her throat, told him everything. "No. Please." She choked out a single desperate plea, then a strangled sob. Ethan gently but firmly took the phone from her nerveless grasp. "Who is this?" he demanded, his tone leaving no doubt as to his authority. A low chuckle, cold and devoid of humor, rasped from the other end. Concerned citizen, the voice drawled a slight, unplaceable accent lacing the English. "Just checking on some misplaced property." A woman. A baby. Answers to Sophia, perhaps. She's not your property, Ethan stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. And you will not contact her again. Another mirthless laugh. Brave words. But misplaced loyalty can be costly. Michael found that out. Tell Sophia that Mr. Moreau expects his dues to be paid, one way or another, and he's a man who always collects. The line went dead. Sophia was openly weeping now, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire frame. Ethan ended the call, his mind racing. Mr. Moreau, a name, a lead. He gently guided Sophia back to the sofa. Sophia, he said, his voice softer but urgent. You have to tell me everything. Who is Victor Moreau? The name, spoken aloud by him, seemed to break her last reserve. He's not just some loan shark, Ethan. She whispered, her voice hoarse with terror. Michael got in deep. Moreau. His business it's filth. Trafficking, extortion, things I don't even want to name. Michael wasn't just in debt for money. He was a courier, a pawn. He saw things, knew things. She looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. When Michael died, I became a loose end. Someone who knew those things too. Moreau doesn't like loose ends. He considers them untidy. A darkly ironic, almost hysterical little laugh escaped her. Ethan felt a cold fury settle deep in his bones. This wasn't just about a debt. It was about silencing a witness. And Sophia, by virtue of her association with Michael, and now her connection to Ethan, was an unacceptable risk to this Victor Moreau. He's powerful, Ethan. Sophia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Untouchable. He has people everywhere. Judges, police. You don't understand. You can't fight him. Watch me. Ethan said the words, quiet but imbued with an unshakable conviction. He picked up his own secure satellite phone and dialed his head of global security, a formidable ex-Mossad operative named Kobe. Kobe, Ethan began, his voice all business now. I have a name. Victor Moreau. I need everything you can find. Financials known associates, illegal activities, pressure points, weaknesses. I want it yesterday. And Kobe, he added, this is priority 1, highest level, my personal involvement. Understood, Mr. Maxwell. Kobe's voice came back crisp and efficient. Moreau. I'll be in touch. Over the next few hours, as Sophia drifted into an uneasy, exhausted sleep on the sofa, Lily cradled beside her, Ethan transformed the apartment into a temporary command center. Encrypted files began to filter in from Kobe's team. The portrait of Victor Moreau that emerged was even uglier than Sophia had described. A sophisticated international criminal cloaked in layers of legitimate businesses with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a penchant for making examples of those who crossed him or failed him. His network was indeed vast. His influence insidious. Ethan studied a surveillance photo of Moreau, a man with expensively tailored suits, cold reptilian eyes, and a smile that never reached them. Charming fellow. Ethan muttered to himself, a grimace twisting his lips. Definitely not invited to my next charity gala. The preliminary report also indicated that Moreau had a particular fondness for a certain discreet, high-end Italian restaurant in the village, a known meeting spot for his inner circle. A possible avenue, Ethan thought, but fraught with risk. A sudden sharp rap on the apartment door, a specific coded knock Ethan had arranged with his security detail, stationed invisibly outside, made him look up, instantly alert. He moved to the door, peering through the peephole. One of his men looking tense. Ethan opened it a fraction. Sir, the man said, his voice low. We just picked up chatter. A couple of Moreau's known enforcers were spotted making inquiries in the neighborhood where you found Ms. Collins, asking about a woman and a baby matching her description. Ethan's blood ran cold. They were closer than he'd thought. Moreau wasn't just making phone calls. He was actively hunting. He glanced back at Sophia, her face still pale, her sleep troubled. The fragile piece of the apartment felt like a thin veneer over a gaping abyss. "They won't find her here," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Increase surveillance. I want eyes on every approach to this building. And get a car ready. We might need to move sooner than planned." He closed the door, a new urgency thrumming through him. Hiding Sophia wasn't enough. This Victor Moreau was a cancer, and cancers needed to be cut out. He looked at the sleeping mother and child, a fierce, protective anger, solidifying into a cold, calculated plan. He wouldn't just shield them. He would dismantle the threat. He would bring Victor Moreau down. The how was still forming a complex equation of risk and resource, but the what was absolute. The game, he realized, had just been irrevocably joined, and Ethan Maxwell never played to lose. The decision to move Sophia and Lily had been made before dawn. Kobe's intelligence on Victor Moreau painted a picture of a predator who was not only relentless, but also possessed an unnerving patience when stalking his prey. The apartment, while secure, was now compromised by the very knowledge that Moreau's tendrils had brushed against it. Ethan had a safer location in mind, a remote estate upstate, fortified and far from the city's prying eyes, a place he rarely used, but kept meticulously maintained by a loyal, tight-lipped staff. Preparations were underway with military precision. Kobe, a reassuringly grim presence, had personally overseen the security sweep of the transport vehicles and the route. Ethan found himself watching Sophia as she moved about the apartment, packing the few new belongings they'd acquired for Lily into a soft duffel bag. There was a new tension in her, a coiled spring of anxiety beneath the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Every unexpected creak of the old building, every distant siren made her flinch. He tried to project an aura of calm control, but an unsettling feeling nagged at him. A faint, almost imperceptible dissonance in the intelligence Kobe was gathering, a sense that Moreau might be anticipating them one step ahead. He'd voiced it to Kobe, who had merely nodded, his dark eyes thoughtful. "We are proceeding with extreme caution, Mr. Maxwell. Assume nothing." They were scheduled to leave under the cover of the late morning lull, a time when the city's rhythms were less frantic. Lily was asleep in her travel cot, a tiny, innocent island of peace in a sea of adult anxieties. Sophia was nursing a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on her daughter, when the world exploded. There was no warning, just a deafening crack, an almost simultaneous shower of glittering shards as the reinforced window overlooking the street imploded inwards. Sophia screamed a raw, primal sound, instinctively throwing her body over the cot, shielding Lily. Ethan, his reflexes honed by years of navigating treacherous business deals where metaphorical bullets flew, reacted a split second later. He launched himself towards them, a human shield adrenaline surging through him like a raw electric current. "Sniper!" He roared, his voice cutting through the sudden, terrifying chaos. "Kobe status." He pressed Sophia and the cot further to the floor, the scent of gunpowder and fear acrid in his nostrils. Another shot slammed into the wall just above where Sophia's head had been, moments before showering them with plaster dust. Kobe's voice, miraculously calm, crackled in Ethan's earpiece. Rooftop building opposite. 2 shooters. Engaging now. "Stay down, sir." The next few minutes were a blur of fragmented, nightmarish images. The terrifying whine of bullets, the thud as they struck masonry. Sophia's choked sobs as she huddled over Lily Ethan, trying to cover them both. His mind racing, calculating angles. Escape routes, the sheer audacity of Moreau attacking them in broad daylight in a high-end residential building. He could hear the distant muffled pops of his own team returning fire. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a brazen execution attempt. Then a chilling sound. A bullet striking the metal frame of the travel cot with a sickening thwack, inches from Lily's sleeping form. Sophia shrieked again, a sound of pure maternal terror, and tried to burrow further to make herself and her child disappear into the floorboards. That was the moment something snapped in Ethan. The cold, calculating businessman, the strategist, was consumed by a white-hot, protective fury. He saw not just Sophia, his lost childhood love, but a mother fighting for her child's life. He saw tiny, innocent Lily caught in a crossfire she couldn't comprehend, and he felt a rage so profound, so absolute, it was almost cleansing. Their neutralizing Kobe's voice, tight with strain. 1 down, 1, retreating. Hold your position. The barrage lessened, then stopped. A new ringing silence descended, broken only by Sophia's desperate, gasping breaths, and Lily finally awakened by the terror wailing at the top of her tiny lungs. Ethan cautiously raised his head. The room was a disaster zone. Shattered glass, bullet-pocked walls, the air thick with dust. His team was already sweeping the building, ensuring no other threats lingered. He turned to Sophia. She was alive, miraculously untouched, though her face was ashen and streaked with tears and dust. Lily, too, though terrified, appeared physically unharmed. He reached out his hand, trembling slightly, and gently brushed plaster from Sophia's hair. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. "They're gone. You're safe." But Sophia didn't seem to hear him. She was rocking back and forth, crooning a desperate, broken lullaby, to Lily, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the bullet mark on the cot. Then the dam of her composure, so precariously held for days, finally burst. Great shuddering sobs racked her body, a torrent of grief. Fear and something else, something that looked like an unbearable weight of guilt. "It's my fault," she gasped, the words torn from her. "It's all my fault. Oh God, Lily. My baby." "Sophia." No, Ethan said firmly, kneeling beside her, trying to meet her gaze. "This is not your fault. This is Moreau. This is what he does. But I should have known," she cried, her voice rising with a desperate anguish. "Michael. He tried to tell me near the end. He was so scared. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, got involved in something he called the Moreau Network. He said it was like quicksand. He told me to take Lily and disappear if anything happened to him. He even gave me a small bag, some cash, a few pieces of jewelry. He said, 'This is all I can give you that's clean.' But I didn't listen enough. I was angry with him, Ethan. Angry for the debts, for the lies." Her confession poured out a torrent of regret and self-recrimination. She'd found more papers after Michael's death, names, offshore account numbers, things she hadn't understood but instinctively knew were dangerous. She'd burned most of them, terrified, but she'd kept a small coded ledger, a desperate, foolish hope that it might somehow be a bargaining chip or proof of Michael's coercion if the legitimate debts ever came to court. "I was so stupid," she wept. "I thought I could protect her. But I led them right to us, didn't I, by existing, by knowing." Ethan listened, his heart aching for her. This wasn't the confession of a collaborator, but of a desperate woman trying to survive, making impossible choices under unimaginable pressure. He pulled her gently into his arms, Sophia, Lily, and all their shared terror. He simply held them until her sobs began to subside into exhausted shudders. As he held her, looking at the devastation around them, at the tiny, precious child who had come so close to death, something profound shifted within him. The image of that bullet striking the cot was seared into his mind. His feelings for Sophia, buried for so long, then reawakened by her plight, now crystallized into a fierce, undeniable love. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a raw, present tense emotion, a desperate need to protect, to cherish, to build a fortress around these two people who had, in a matter of days, become the absolute center of his world. He would not just fight Moreau. He would obliterate him, not for revenge, not for justice alone, but for them, for their future. A silent vow more binding than any contract he'd ever signed sealed itself in his soul. Kobe entered the room, then his face grim. "The immediate threat is neutralized, sir. One sniper apprehended, the other escaped, but we have a trace." However, he paused, and Ethan knew with a sinking certainty what was coming next. The precision of the attack, their knowledge of this location. It suggests a leak. A serious one. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze hardening. The unsettling feeling he'd had earlier now had a name betrayal. "Find it, Kobe," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "Find who sold them to us, and bring them to me." Kobe's eyes dark, and knowing met his. "Already on it, Mr. Maxwell." He gave a slight nod. "And, sir, perhaps a vacation to a less eventful location might be in order once this is settled." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. He looked down at Sophia, now quiet in his arms, Lily finally asleep against her chest. "Perhaps, Kobe," he said softly. "Perhaps. But first there was a war to win, and a mole to unearth." The sprawling upstate estate was a world away from the terror-filled apartment in the city. Nestled amidst acres of dense private woodland, it was a fortress color choice in an elegant old-world charm. Here, under the vigilant watch of Kobe's most trusted security team, a fragile calm began to settle over Sophia. Lily, oblivious to the storms that had raged around her, gurgled happily in the fresh country air, her laughter a balm to Sophia's frayed nerves. But for Ethan, the tranquility was merely the quiet before his own calculated storm. The mole within his organization had been identified with chilling speed. A mid-level financial analyst with gambling debts Moreau had ruthlessly exploited. The betrayal had been dealt with swiftly and silently, ensuring no further leaks. Now Ethan's entire focus was on Victor Moreau. Waiting for Moreau's next move was not an option. It was an invitation for further bloodshed. Ethan Maxwell was not a man who waited to be hunted. He was a man who turned the tables. In the estate's secure study, a room lined with books that had likely seen more than a few strategic battles planned within their silent witness, Ethan and Kobe pored over the intelligence. Sophia, initially hesitant, had eventually shared the details of Michael's coded ledger. It was, as she'd suspected, a damning record of illicit transactions names and offshore entities. Moreau's dirty laundry meticulously, if unknowingly documented by one of his pawns. Cross-referenced with Kobe's own extensive data, it provided the missing pieces of a very ugly puzzle. Moreau's arrogance is his Achilles' heel, Ethan mused, tracing a line across a complex network chart Kobe had projected. He believes he's untouchable, that his layers of legitimate businesses provide an impenetrable shield. He tapped a holding company based in the Cayman Islands, a key node in Moreau's money laundering operations, and a smirk, cold and predatory, touched his lips. "I think it's time we introduced a little regulatory scrutiny." The plan that Ethan devised was audacious, a symphony of digital infiltration, financial maneuvering, and perfectly timed anonymous tips to carefully selected international authorities, agencies known for their incorruptibility and tenacity. It wasn't about a physical confrontation. It was about dismantling Moreau's empire from the inside out, using the man's own greed and illicit dealings as the very tools of his destruction. Kobe's team, a global network of specialists, set to work with quiet, lethal efficiency, planting digital breadcrumbs, triggering alarms within financial regulatory systems, and ensuring that irrefutable evidence would land on the right desks at precisely the right moment. Sophia watched Ethan during those days, a new kind of awe mixing with the remnants of her fear. She saw not just the kind protector, but a formidable strategist, a man who moved with a quiet intensity and an absolute, unwavering focus. She saw the power he wielded, not just in terms of wealth, but in intellect and influence, and for the first time, she allowed a flicker of genuine hope to ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this man from her past could truly conquer the monster who haunted her present. The culmination of their efforts came a week later. Ethan had arranged for Sophia and Lily to be in the estate's secluded walled garden, far from any potential electronic surveillance or visual lines of sight under Kobe's personal watch. He himself was in the study, a bank of monitors displaying encrypted news feeds and secure communications. The trap had been set. Now they waited. The first indication came via a terse message from one of Kobe's European contacts. Subject A. Moreau is agitated. Unusual financial activity flagged. Authorities are closing in on his Zurich affiliate. Then another Moreau was making panicked calls, trying to move assets, trying to understand how his carefully constructed house of cards was suddenly inexplicably collapsing. Ethan allowed himself a grimly satisfied smile. Moreau the predator was now the prey, scrambling, confused, exposed. The final act played out on a live, albeit heavily censored, international news feed. Victor Moreau attempting to board a private jet at a discreet airfield outside Geneva was intercepted. There was no dramatic shootout, no Hollywood chase, just a quiet, efficient encirclement by Swiss federal agents. Moreau's face, usually a mask of cold arrogance, was contorted in disbelief, then fury as the charges were read. Money laundering, racketeering conspiracy. The list was long and damning. Ethan watched as Moreau was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his aura of invincibility shattered. He leaned back in his chair, a profound sense of exhaustion, and an equally profound sense of grim triumph washing over him. He picked up the secure line to Kobe. "It's done," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "Indeed," Sir Kobe replied. "A clean sweep. His network is already starting to unravel. It will take years to sort through the wreckage, but Victor Moreau as a threat is neutralized." A pause. He won't be seeing the outside of a maximum security prison for a very, very long time. Ethan nodded slowly. Good. Ensure the relevant authorities have everything they need. Kobe. Anonymously, of course. He thought of the smirking, cold-eyed man whose reign of terror had caused so much pain. When they transfer him, Ethan added a dry, almost undetectable note of irony in his voice. "Tell them he's all yours. Try not to lose him. He's surprisingly slippery." Later that evening, Ethan found Sophia sitting by the large bay window in the living room, Lily asleep in her arms. The news of Moreau's arrest was breaking across international channels. Sophia was watching a report, her expression unreadable. As the footage of Moreau being led away in handcuffs played again, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, not yet, but it was a smile of release, of a terrible weight finally irrevocably lifted, a tiny, vengeful but deeply human acknowledgement of justice served. She looked up as Ethan entered her eyes, luminous in the soft lamplight. For the first time since he'd found her on that desolate street corner, he saw a trace of the old Sophia in them, a flicker of light of peace. Is it really over?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. But this time they were tears of relief, not terror. Ethan walked over to her, his gaze gentle. He reached out his fingers, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her temple. "Yes, Sophia," he said softly. "It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt Lily." She leaned into his touch, a sigh escaping her that seemed to carry years of fear and pain with it. The room was quiet, the only sounds Lily's soft breathing and the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. The scars Ethan knew would remain. Trauma didn't simply vanish, but here in this quiet moment, with the monster caged and the long night finally giving way, was the undeniable hard-won beginning of their earned peace. The air itself felt lighter, imbued with the fragile, precious scent of hope. And for the first time, the path towards a future, once obscured by shadows, seemed to stretch before them, uncertain perhaps, but finally blessedly clear. Spring had breathed new life into the sprawling gardens of the upstate estate, 6 months after Victor Moreau's empire had crumbled into dust and headlines. The world outside still buzzed with the lingering Zhendong-s of his downfall, but within these peaceful sun-dappled acres, a quieter, more profound transformation was taking place. Sophia, no longer the haunted wraith Ethan had found on a cold city street, moved with a rediscovered grace. The shadows in her sapphire eyes hadn't vanished entirely. Some scars, she knew, would always remain faint, silvery lines on the landscape of her soul, but they were now illuminated by an inner light, a resilient strength that was both captivating and deeply inspiring. She had, with Ethan's gentle encouragement, started seeing a therapist, a kind, wise woman who helped her navigate the labyrinth of her trauma. And slowly, painstakingly, Sophia was rebuilding her sense of self, not as Michael's tragic widow or Moreau's terrified quarry, but simply as Sophia. She'd even unearthed a set of old sketching pencils, a passion long dormant, and now spent quiet afternoons by the koi pond, Lily babbling happily beside her on a blanket, capturing the delicate dance of light on water, the intricate beauty of a single rose. Lily, at nearly 18 months, was a whirlwind of chubby-cheeked energy and infectious giggles, a living, breathing testament to hope's enduring power. She adored Ethan with an uncomplicated toddler devotion, her face lighting up like a miniature sun whenever he entered the room. And Ethan, the titan of industry, the man who could make global markets tremble with a word, was utterly, irrevocably captivated by this tiny human. He'd rearranged his life with a decisiveness that had astonished his board, and initially himself. Board meetings were now frequently conducted via secure video link from the estate's study. Non-essential travel was delegated. He made it a point to be home for bath time, for story time, for the quiet ritual of tucking Lily into her small bed, her tiny hand clutching his finger. Their evenings, Ethan and Sophia's, were filled with a gentle rhythm. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing stories of their separate intervening years, the joys, the sorrows, the lessons learned. Sophia spoke of her initial dreams with Michael, her gradual, horrifying disillusionment, and the crushing weight of her fear. Ethan, in turn, shared his own journey, the relentless drive for success, the loneliness that had sometimes accompanied it, the realization that an empire, no matter how vast, felt hollow without someone to share its true meaning with. There were no easy answers, no magical erasures of past pain, but there was honesty, a profound, healing honesty that drew them closer with each shared vulnerability. One sun-drenched Saturday morning, Ethan was on the lawn, attempting, with a comical lack of success, to assemble a brightly coloured multi-part climbing frame for Lily. Instructions lay discarded beside him, a testament to their apparent uselessness. Lily, sensing an opportunity for mischief, was gleefully trying to help by absconding with various crucial-looking nuts and bolts, her delighted shrieks echoing in the clear air. Sophia watched them from the veranda, a soft smile playing on her lips, as Ethan let out an exaggerated groan of frustration, finally collapsing onto the grass in mock defeat, much to Lily's amusement. It appears Sophia called out her voice light, and teasing the master strategist has finally met his match, a plastic giraffe with too many screws. Ethan looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun, a genuine, unforced laugh bubbling up. This giraffe, Sophia, is engineered with more complexity than a Swiss bank vault. And my diminutive assistant here, he said, scooping up a giggling Lily, seems to believe these bolts are a new form of teething rusk. Lily promptly tried to chew on his chin, and he nuzzled her, his heart swelling with a tenderness that still at times caught him off guard. Later, as Lily napped, and a comfortable quiet settled around them on the veranda, Ethan reached for Sophia's hand, his gaze serious, but warm. "We need to talk, Soph." He began using the old familiar diminutive he hadn't dared use until recently. About us. About the future. Sophia's breath caught slightly. She looked at their intertwined fingers, then up at his face, her eyes searching his. "Ethan, what you've done for us. For Lily. There are no words. This isn't about gratitude," he said, gently, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "This is about what I want. What I hope we want." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Sophia. I think in some way I never stopped. And these past months, seeing you again, seeing you with Lily, seeing your strength, your resilience, it's only made that love deeper, more real." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but this time they were tears of a different kind. Tears of disbelief, of overwhelming emotion, of a joy she hadn't thought she'd ever feel again. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick. I love you too. So much. You didn't just save us. You brought me back to life. Then let's build that life." He said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "Together. All three of us." He paused, then continued, "I've been looking at properties. Closer to the city perhaps for when Lily starts school. But with space, with privacy. A home, Sophia. For us. Not my penthouse, not this estate as a refuge, but our home." And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel. It wasn't that kind of grand public gesture. This was quiet, intimate, real. He opened it, revealing a simple, elegant sapphire ring, the exact shade of her eyes, flanked by two flawless diamonds. "I know this is fast after everything he said," his voice a little unsteady now. "And there's no pressure. But Sophia Collins, mother of the most enchanting little bolt thief in the world, would you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife, of letting me be a father to Lily in every way that matters?" Sophia's tears were flowing freely now, but her smile was radiant like the sun breaking through after a long storm. "Yes," she breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It wasn't just a symbol of his love or his wealth. It was a promise of safety, of devotion, of a shared future, painstakingly reclaimed from the ashes of their respective pasts. There would be challenges, they both knew. Healing was a journey, not a destination. But as they sat there, hands clasped the late afternoon sun, casting long, warm shadows across the garden, there was an unshakable sense of peace, of rightness. Lily stirred in her nearby playpen, murmuring in her sleep, a tiny, contented sound. Ethan looked at Sophia, her face luminous with love and hope, and he knew with a certainty that resonated deep in his soul that this was his true north, his greatest achievement. Not the billions in the bank, not the skyscrapers bearing his name, but this, This love, this family, this hard-won, precious, everyday happiness they would now build together, one sun-drenched, laughter-filled day at a time. The past would always be a part of their story, a testament to their resilience. But the future, their future, was a blank page, waiting for them to write a new chapter, one filled with love, with light, and with the enduring promise of a shared dawn. From the biting cold of a desperate street corner to the warm promise of a shared dawn, Ethan and Sophia's journey reminds us that life's most profound treasures are often found or rediscovered in the face of its greatest trials. Isn't it a powerful thought how echoes from our past can resurface to reshape our entire future, urging us to redefine what truly constitutes a life well lived? Perhaps we all carry a quiet hope for such deep connections, for the kind of love that offers not just shelter from the storm, but the courage to rebuild in its aftermath. This story of love found lost and then fiercely reclaimed certainly left all of us here with a great deal to reflect upon. What about you? What in Ethan's decision to fight for Sophia, or in Sophia's quiet journey toward healing and trust, resonated most deeply with your own experiences or beliefs? We genuinely cherish hearing your perspectives. And as we continue to bring these narratives to life, your insights are invaluable. If any aspect of today's story, or even the way it was told, sparked an idea for improvement, or if you have suggestions for future journeys you'd like to explore with us, please do share your constructive thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback is a vital part of how we grow and strive to make each story more impactful. If Ethan and Sophia's path from despair to an earned happiness touched your heart, we'd be so grateful for a like. And if you feel their story of resilience might offer a glimmer of hope or a moment of connection for someone else, please consider sharing it, to ensure you don't miss out on future stories that delve into the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. We warmly invite you to subscribe and click that notification bell. Together, let's continue to uncover these meaningful narratives that remind us of the extraordinary courage found in ordinary lives.